Hey guys, Saf coming at you with another Raid Shadow Legends video. So in today's video, I'm going to be looking at patch 6.1. It was quite a small patch, which, to be honest, I've been away and it's been a bit late, and because it was a small patch, I didn't really put much focus into it. But we do have 4 new champions, a bunch of different champion changes that's worth looking into. And I did just want to kind of give a bit of a shout out to some of the sort of lesser champions in this fusion. We're all focusing on obviously the final outcome, Marinix, and whether Marinix is worth going for, but I actually think that the other champions are pretty good. The elf is not terrible for the Iron Twins. Decreased speed, we've also got an increased accuracy heal reduction there as well, so pretty good for something like the Iron Twins if you want to try and get this decreased speed out. It's not 100%, but if you are limited on your options, then it's decent. So it's not bad if you're early to mid game. The epic, however, I think is actually much better. And it has to be considered amongst the context of the faction as a whole. So with Tomoa, we basically get an A1 which has a chance to steal a random buff. Okay, that's not crazy, but it's still a 50% chance. So, you know, every other attack, she's probably on average going to steal a random buff. She has a chance to place a decreased attack, 100% chance on a 3-turn cooldown. And then we have this cool ability on the A3. It's a bit unique. We'll place a counterattack buff on a target ally. That will probably go via team order. So it'll go leader, position 1, position 2, etc. And if it's a Shadowkin, it goes on for 3 turns on a 4-turn cooldown. Then we get a 15% turn meter fill and an increased crit damage, which is universal. That's any champion. Then we get an increased crit rate buff on 2 turns on allies from the Shadowkin faction. So really, it's really valuable to use this in the Shadowkin because you get increased crit rate, increased crit damage, and a single target counterattack. We also have this passive. It's basically like Jintoro's, but a little bit different. Increases all turn meter fill effects and heals by 20% when used on allies in the Shadowkin faction. If there are multiple champions on this team with this skill, only one will activate. So what that basically means is you can use Brethren with Jintoro's passive, but you can't have multiple Tomoas, only one will work. This is quite good. It's a 20% boost to any heal or increase turn meter. So the reason why I say that's important when we look at the faction is because the Shadowkin faction actually has some insane champions. If we think of Clan Boss, if I was building a Clan Boss team and I had the pick of my pick of any champions, we've got the best ally protector in Kyoku. We've got the best damage dealer in Ninja. So that's already 2 slots. We've got the second best damage dealer in Jintoro. That's 3 slots. Then we could put Tomoa in for like a 15% turn meter fill in a potential 2-1 speed. We then also have some crazy epics. We've got Taragi as an option to Kyoku, or you could run both. You've got Riho, who can cleanse, heal, and has every debuff under the sun. We've got Yumiko, reset champion. We have got Sachi is an awesome champion for certain things. Decreased accuracy on the A1. Also has increased attack and a turn meter fill on a 4-turn cooldown. We have a Leech, a decreased crit rate. Pretty strong champion. Fenchi is one of the best poisoners in the faction. This hits really hard when you get to 10 poisons. We've also got Gembo. It's a great arena nuker, so if you want to use Tomoa as a secondary booster into Gembo, it's a really good option. Have a Boro, is great for Hydra. So when I'm looking at this kind of, normally faction specific effects are bad, normally. But in this scenario, because the faction is so good, with so many different options and flexibility and different ways to build teams, I actually think as a filler champion, it's probably, if you're not interested in the fusion, it's worth picking up one of these champions. Just do 4 of the events along the way. I think there's 2 arena tournaments, that's like 2 epics, do a couple of artifact enhancements, maybe one of the dungeon tournaments, and you're done, and you can basically keep an epic. You might find some use for this. I'm going to be looking at some speed tunes long term. I have kept a duplicate, and I'm going for the fusion for some crazy reason, but I just wanted to kind of give that a bit of a shout out at the start of this video. Obviously, we're going to look at the patch notes, and we're going to look at the multipliers as we go through this video, but I actually think this epic is worth keeping as a consideration. So with that said, let's have a look at the official patch notes. This was released on the 29th of September. There has been some notes that have been added since in the Raid Digest, which I will briefly cover as well as we go through. But this patch is pretty much a smaller patch. We had a massive patch 6.0, with all the blessings, all the awakening, all the different changes. We had the Iron Twins. We had lots of different things in there
This is kind of a cleanup patch from all the problems that has created, and there are still some outstanding bugs that need to be fixed. But what have we got then? So we've got that Deck of Fate events that is coming probably at the end of the month for Halloween. They actually call this the bingo event in the game code, which I thought was quite humorous. It's going to be a system, if you've seen the preview videos, where you're going to have like a tile of cards, and it's almost like finding pairs. If you open the same and you find a pair, then you get a reward. If you get the same rarity 3 times, you get bonus rewards. The RNG aspect, which is in all aspects of Raid, is going to be, can you get the same rarities matching up? That's where all the big rewards are going to be. You're probably going to have rubbish rewards on individual cards, but if you get 3 rarities in one go, say like 3 legendaries in one go, you could have an insane payoff like legendary books and everything else. And the event is either going to be really, really good for some people or really, really bad for other people. I feel like this is going to be like themed, similar to the Heroes Path, where this one's going to be Halloween. We'll probably have one at Christmas time. We may have one at like different other periods as well. Thanksgiving, we might get one. So I think it's interesting. It's still going to be a case of like the Heroes Path, where you have to do the underlying same style of events: divers, training, summoning, arena, tournaments. Those are still going to happen. You're just going to get these tokens that you can use on this additional Deck of Fate event. We'll have to see how the rewards are. Once we get more information, we will take a look. So far, there's nothing in the game code of any detail that I can see that I would be comfortable releasing at the moment. We also get Forge Pass Season 4. It is the same rewards as Season 3. There hasn't been any changes, to be honest. But Season 3 was pretty good, and I got it. I think Bolster's really worth getting. For $20, so I think it's like £18, I think, for British people. You get a hell of a lot of material, a hell of a lot of things, and that is actually quite good, even if you don't particularly want the Bolster set, because you get access to high-end 6-star, 5-star gear. You can craft around about 200 to 210 5 to 6-star gear. If you're in the early to mid game, that's a hell of a lot of energy, and for £20 or £18 is actually worth it, in my opinion. Tournament improvements. Now for the long requested using skill. So basically, you can use skill tomes to get some champion training tournaments. Now, in the current situation, like today, we have a champion training tournament on CVC. You're going to get a lot of points here, because if you're booking champions for clan versus clan, that's 200 points a book. They fall in line. Awesome. That's just extra bonus rewards. Outside of that, people shouldn't really be going and using books just for champion training. But 10 legendary books is about 2,000 points in champion training. And an average champion training tournament is around about 7,700. So it's a little bit towards getting you done there. So that's not terrible. It's a nice change, I think. I've got some chat rules. I've never really used the global chat in game. Then we've got some rebalances. Baron, we've all been talking about Baron. Base speed increases. I'm going to cover these types of changes specifically for Baron in the unofficial patch notes when we look at multipliers. But we have got basically a removal of that secret skill into having Sky Piercer available all the time on a cooldown. But it does come at a cost of an ignore defense change for being pure damage to 50% of the target's defense. Next up, we got some pointless epic changes. And what I mean by pointless, Snorting Thug is now going to have a chance to steal a buff 10% more, and the cooldown is down a little bit. Nobody's really using Snorting Thug unless you're really desperate. Enemy max HP is rather useless outside of Scarab, and most people will use Destroy rather than direct damage because it's just a little bit more efficient. But it's, you know, I suppose it brings their cooldowns down a little bit. But these are epic champions that really are so dated that they need almost a complete overhaul. Bloodfeather, increased chance of critical hit from 20 to 30%. And slightly more decreased turn meter. So that's not terrible. But again, we're not talking like crazy changes here. Bloodfeather is the one I'm more interested in to test out, and I may look at that as a specific guide going forward. But nothing of these rebalances apart from Baron is significantly that important. Then we've got Iron Twins, probably the most controversial change in this update. The first hit, and the important thing about this is the first hit. So you can do some clever stuff around the first targeting, making sure that they've got block damage or something of a recovery, like Nogdar. I think if you've seen Hellhades team, he did like a Nogdar thing where the first champion revives and then you're okay. You can still run an unkillable team. But the first hit of the A1 Voltaic Pendulums will ignore unkillable when it hits 40%. This is the death of Paragon. And they also have bug fixed the issue where the magic affinity was set to a base resistance of 100, not 30. I thought that was just a typo when they created the boss arrays. So that's a simple fix. Then we probably have the longest bug fixing list I've ever seen in a single patch notes for Playerium, and they've still not even fixed some of the more pressing bugs in the game. So these are pretty much just, we need to fix these because they are having an impact on the quality of the game more than they actually are fixing core problems. So I'm going to go through some of these. Some of them I'm going to skip over if they're a visual bug, because a lot of them were fixing things like the 3v3 with blessings, just fixing the sort of display issues where it's not lagging, it's not getting fixed on camera and different things. So we got fixed the visual bug that caused Burungari to move enemies slightly when attacking them. Okay, it's nothing. Fixed the visual bug that resulted in battle text not displaying. Again, these things are visual. Fixed a bug that resulted in sleep debuff animation not appearing when this debuff was placed. Okay. Fixed the Dukes, the Pierce, Lunatics outburst skill animation. These are all visual changes. Fixed the increased res buff animation. Visual. Fixed an issue that caused the game to freeze when a protected continuous heal buff was placed by 2 Hanorach equipped with a protection set in a battle with Harvest Jack. Wow. I actually have seen a change with Harvest Jack here, which might be relevant to this, which we'll cover in the unofficial patch notes. But that's a very, very niche specific test. So someone in Playerium has been listening to bug reports. Thanks, that's good. That's a positive thing to see something so specific that must have come from a bug report. That isn't something that they would happen upon during their random play test on a sunny afternoon. That is something that they would have specifically been told about. Switch the icons of colonies always watched in penance skills. Okay, that's visual. Fixed a bug that resulted in a visual effects from buffs and debuffs on Ultimate Death Sentence model not being displayed. That was actually quite annoying because he looked like he's still alive or not quite alive. Yeah, they fixed that here. Fixed an issue that affected how Ultimate Death Knight HP bar was displayed whenever his HP was increased. That was also quite annoying because he thought he was dying and he just wouldn't die because he's got more HP because of his passive. So that's good. We're only halfway through. What other things? Fixed a bug that resulted in sleep debuffs not being removed by skills that remove debuffs in certain conditions. Okay. Fixed an issue that caused the game to freeze after changing around. This was horrific. I tried to do 3v3 when this happened and it was like, it would be 10-second freezes between attack animations. You couldn't move the camera. You couldn't select your champions. It was horrific. That's a massive fix. That's more important than anything else. Fixed a visual bug that resulted in a champion not transforming into sheep. Fine. Fixed a bug that resulted in the skills section in the collection not displaying after changing a champion's blessings. I did have that bug. It was a bit weird. Fixed an issue that caused the game to freeze when Dark Resolve Blessing activated under certain conditions in battle. I have seen them change this skill as well. I'm still trying to figure out what they've done, but they've effectively changed the phasing of when this activates. So there must have been an issue with the previous phasing. And when I mean phasing, I mean at what point during the skill ordering and the battle engine is it actually firing that passive. Fixed the animation of Iron Twins Doomsday Machine skill if the boss was killed during the animation. I don't think they fixed that, to be honest, but maybe they have. I've seen it still happen. Fixed a bug that resulted in champions not being able to resist the extension of Iron Brand debuff. That's actually quite important because if you're unlucky and you get a 3%, then the Iron Brand debuff would continuously stack up so you couldn't run your decrease resistance and decrease accuracy kind of setup for a team. If you're running that kind of team, decrease accuracy, increase resistance. Now it'll mean that if you do get 3%, you can outrun the debuff because as long as you've got enough resistance, you shouldn't get it extended. So that's an actual important bug fix. Added a scroll option to all the champion and boss skill animations that pop up in battles after pressing the skill icons. Okay, cool, nice quality of life. Fixed an issue on Windows where the game would crash if the display mode was changed in a location with a scroll function and several champion icons. Buggy. Added a visible scroll bar to the chances section in the Forge. Okay, fixed a bug that resulted in the system messages not displaying in the global chat and fixed an issue with a number of failed artifact attempts would not update correctly between the client and the server. Okay, so most of these are visual, most of them are quality of life, and most of them fix like core gameplay effects, like things don't move or things get stuck. They haven't really fixed core underlying problems with some blessings. For example, Phantom Touch will proc on self-targeted abilities, such as Renegade's A3, and it will also proc on things like ally-targeted damage in the unique situations like Farrak in the Fat. That's not really ideal. You don't want to kill your champion with a blessing that you're trying to do damage to the enemy boss. They need to fix that. I know there is a bug as well with temporal chains where if you have multiple 6-star awakened temporal chains, then instead of decreasing the turn meter twice, it actually increases the enemy's turn meter. I don't have 6-star awakened champions of a legendary quality to be able to show that bug, but I have seen it happen from various different conversations I've had with other creators. So we've got that bug as well. And there are also a couple of other little niche problems with different effects. So for example, Soul Reap should really be not having an issue with its boss versus champion effects. I'll cover that in a future video in more detail. So they haven't really bug fixed any sort of core underlying issues with some blessings, but they have made it so that the game is playable. So that's good. So that's the end of the patch notes. As I said, it's very much a clean-up patch, a few champion changes, and of course the fusion. So let's head over to the unofficial part of the patch notes, where I'm just going to break down in more detail the multipliers of the champions. So in this section, I will cover things that I have extracted from the game data. This isn't really server-side information. This is stuff that sits in our client when we install the game, static information about the champions, skills, multipliers, bosses, all those sorts of things. It's not really what you would call data mining in that sense, but it is considered data mining for pretty much anyone who understands these things. The stuff here isn't official information from Playroom, but it is in the game client, so it's pretty accurate based on how we understand the game. So the first things I want to cover here are some skill changes. The first thing, they have updated the text description of Suzerain Catone's ability. He used to say that his ability cannot be blocked or resisted, and that was specifically to be removing shields. And some people had notified me specifically that, can we use this to deal with bolster? But actually all it meant was it couldn't be resisted. So they've now updated that skill description to reflect that. We've always had it on the website as cannot be resisted for clarity, but in the game it used to say cannot be blocked and resisted. They've now updated it. Just a localization change, just a text change. It hasn't changed the skill in itself. The other thing that I mentioned earlier about Harvest Jack, they've made a change now where instead of the continuous heals being a repeatable effect, so if there was a continuous heal on a target, it would repeat it until there was no continuous heals on the target to swap it to a poison. They've now gone, if there's one continuous heal, remove all continuous heals in one go. I don't actually know what the impact of this will be, but if someone has been using Harvest Jack a lot and they've noticed any weird things, put it in the comment below and I'll see if I can follow up on it in a future video. I do have a Harvest Jack myself, but I need to do some building to test it out thoroughly. It shouldn't really result in any performance issues, changes in terms of the way you use Harvest Jack, but perhaps it might because of the way they've changed it. So only 2 changes there. Then we have an updated champion in Baron. Nothing has really changed in terms of the damage multipliers. They're all still the same. Obviously the A4 Sky Piercer is now an active skill rather than a secret skill. Base speed increase from 90 to 100 is actually massive. It means that you don't have such an awful uphill battle to make him go fast enough. Although in the current arena meta, speed isn't necessarily everything anymore. But if you're using him in any other areas, 90 speed was a bit of a crutch that you had to overcome. There is changes obviously to his passives. I will be doing a video this week too, in fact, on Ignore Defense mechanics and Baron specifically, comparing his before and after damage. I've got some clan boss runs to have a look at as well, so we can see, is this overall change good or bad for this champion? I think initially I thought it was terrible, but on average, considering the cooldown changes on the other skills as well, it's actually quite okay. It's a good change for him. I think it actually makes him relevant. He is now probably one of the best high-end arena nukers because he can ignore so much defense. The first champion we're going to look at here for the new set, for the Fusion and the Void Legendary that they released, Prosecutor, is a high elf, a rare champion, is attack based. 1288 base attack is okay, but it is sort of Kale level. It is okay for rare. Base 96 speed, actually hits quite hard. It's a strong hit. I think the A2 is the AoE, strong AoE hit. A little bit weaker than Kale, not as strong as Kale, but not too far away. So actually, if you want a decent damage dealer, it's not too bad. Would you use this champion over Kale? Probably not, because you're going to have Kale in your clan boss and transition him into your nuker if you're progressing in that state from early to mid to late. But it's not a terrible champion. I think, as I said, it has some uses in Iron Twins. Then we get Tomoa. Tomoa is kind of a support champion, really. She does do her damage based on attack, but she won't do any crazy damage at all. So 1024 base attack. It's a good to low base speed. I think around about 100 is average for an epic. It's not terrible. It's not awful. But it is not crazy either. So 99 base speed. A1 is a 4 times attack, and the A2 is a 3.9 times attack. Both of them are considered average damage. You bring this champion for the support it brings to your team, not the damage it does itself. Then we have Marinix, the Fusion champion. So it's a bit of an issue because a lot of people are probably saying it's not a good champion for arena nuking. And if you just looked at the multipliers, you'd be asking, why. It's pretty strong. The main issue is the reliance on the Hex debuff and the issue of trying to sustain that Hex debuff. If we just looked at multipliers, Ruel would be the #1 nuking champion in the game because of his ability to actually just overpower everyone with his Hex debuff. The problem is trying to activate his Hex debuff and keep them all up at the same time without any form of protection on those debuffs. That's a problem. But we do have an attack-based champion, good base speed at 100, 1,487 attack. That is good to high, but not crazy. I mean, we're talking the crazy level will be 1,600 plus. It's an A1 that can attack 2 times, but it can attack an extra 2 times on one of those. So up to 4 times attack. So we're assuming here it's going to hit 4 times. If it does, it's a 1.9 times attack times 4, which is godlike. That is up there with Candrathon and Phenax as the top A1s in the game. So if you just enable A1 in sort of clan boss, it will probably rip the clan boss apart. It is quite insane. I will probably be doing a test on that when I get the champion myself. The A2 is an AoE, is a 4 times attack, and that is godlike. The A3, which is probably the more preferred AoE, is actually 4.1 times attack, but only strong, and that is just due to booking, really. That A3 has 10% less books, and that is why it's on the edge, but she is low range of godlike, so she's only just godlike based on this. I am assuming with these stats as well that she's gaining 20% more attack from her Hex passive. Obviously, 4 Hexes out would be an arena setup. That would give her 20% more base attack. And it's still just not good enough. I think you lose the Hex, you lose so much power, you lose all the effects. She's still a solid arena nuker, so she's not the worst champion in the game for that. But I think a lot of the sort of other content creators are not going for this fusion purely because there are better options to just set up and run for it, and the damage is just not good enough compared to other nukers in the game. And finally, we get Davy Jones himself, Fortis. This champion is just not good. This is a classic example of a concept that goes into development that comes out and it is not tested. It's a defense-based nuker that is purely focused around fear. More fears you put out, the more stronger he gets. Cool, awesome. The issue is they're assuming you're going to be running like 20 fears to be able to do damage, but a battle is never going to be in that situation. If you're using him for arena as a nuker, you'll be lucky to get 4 fears out, let alone anything else. If you're using him in sort of content, well, you're going to use it on waves, and to be honest, most people are going to run some sort of quick clear. They're not willing to spend hours upon hours upon hours going through it. And if you're pulling this champion early on, then potentially it might have some use for you, but not really, because the rest of his kit doesn't quite make sense, because you still need crit rate in some places, even though it says you don't. You still need accuracy, even in some places it says you don't. So it's not great. It is defense-based, which keeps them alive. And the big thing I want to note here, obviously, they have come out and they have acknowledged that this champion is not good enough, and they're going to be fixing him in patch 6.2. So I'm expecting an update to his damage. I did cover this in a video with Scratch. I'll put that in the comments below. Thanks for having me, Scratch, talking about this in particular, because obviously a Void Legendary gets a lot of, especially end game PvP players, really excited, and then when he's tested it on the test server, it was disappointing. Why is it disappointing in particular? Well, he's a 1,387 base defense. That's actually quite low for a Void Legendary. If we think of champions like Ragash, one of the newer ones, he's about 100 more base, which makes a big difference. We've got a base speed of 97, which is also quite low. His A1 is a 3 times defense attack, which is strong. His A2, which is a 3.8 times defense, is also strong. But he's Void Legendary, so you want a little bit more, especially when really he's designed to do damage. Now, the issue with the A3 is technically it has a base of 3.5 defense, but it kind of assumes you're going to be doing lots of fears. So you need to do like 10 fears before you hit that 3.5 times defense. So even though the ability says, oh, every fear increases the damage by 10%, well, it does. The only problem is it starts at like 0.35 times defense. So therefore, that 10% is really small until you get it up to like 10, 15, 20 fears. And it's only on fear application. So you got to run this like multiple times. You're talking like potentially 2 rotations, 3 rotations of the enemy's turns, not yours, the enemy's. So the multiplier is a 0.1, so that's the 10%, times the number of fears that have been placed in the round, so resets in the next round, and then times 3.5, and then it's times by the defense. And this basically, even at 4 fears, is calculated at weak. It is really poor. So the other problem as well with this champion, it kind of doesn't work for bosses because you can't fear a boss. So he's really for wave clearing and arena, and he doesn't do enough damage for either of those in the frequency and pace that you need. He's a terrible champion in his current state. It's a great idea. On paper, he reads really strong. The passive is quirky, but it doesn't quite work because he takes too much punishment to really activate that passive. It's a bit like the old Gerptug ability. They reduced the poisons that Gerptug would place on his team because it was just too much of a penalty to pay. And now at 2.5% instead of 5%, it's a lot better. It's half the amount of damage you receive. And I think his passive is going to need something similar. A little bit less punishment for using that passive. In his current form, they need to do quite a lot of changes to his damage here. I would say that needs to start at 3.5 times defense, and then it needs to be multiplied by 10% for every fear you place. So it's a 3.5 times defense times 1.4 multiplier, not 0.1 times fears times 3.5. That would mean instead of a 1.4, which I think is what it's roughly at around 4 fears, it would be more like about 4 to 5 times multiplier. Then you actually have a viable Void Arena nuker. That's much better. And it's worth then having a second fear champion to enable him. Right now, it's not worth bringing a second fear champion to enable this champion. So there you go, guys. That is the end of the patch notes video. If you are going for the fusion, today is quite a busy day. You've got the training tournament, the Fire Knight, the Dungeon Divers, also the Artifact Enhancement event. I think there's about a week left on it. I'm going for it. I think I've got about 9 of those rares, and I kept an epic back to do some testing on Tomoa. If not, take a look at the epic, have a look at the rare. I think for most people the rare is probably out, but the epic I think is still pretty interesting. And hopefully we'll get a good change to Fortis in patch 6.2. But until then, I will catch you in the next video.